Hey everyone, we are moving on to our new chapter this week, Southern Empires, Southern Seas, focusing on tropical Africa and tropical Asia. Take a look at the timeline. Notice some of these new empires and cities that we'll be talking about, especially the rise of port cities. All of these have one thing in common. Well, two things in common. They're built on trade and they are very, very wealthy. So, moving on to our key concepts. Take a look, improving transportation, movement of people, cross-cultural exchanges, and naturally pathogens. Again, the Black Death. Always, right? We've talked about how the Black Death carried by traders from the Mongols into Europe, but one thing we haven't talked about is how the Black Death affected the rest of the world and how it actually wiped out a very large part of Egypt's population. We'll talk about that too. The tropical environment of Africa and Asia is where we are starting today. The tropical zone falls between the Tropic of Cancer in the north and the Tropic of Capricorn in the south. The Afro-Asian tropics have a cycle of rainy and dry seasons dictated by the alternating winds known as monsoons. Parts of Mesoamerica and South America are also in the tropical zone. While those parts of the tropics, such as coastal West Africa, West Central Africa, and southern India get abundant rainfall, there's also an arid zone extending from across northern Africa, aka the Sahara, and northwest India. And another arid zone is in southwestern Africa. Altitude also affects climate, with high altitude mountain ranges and plateaus, and they've got cooler weather and shorter growing seasons. And then there's the low altitude coastal plains and river valleys. Soil is more fertile, longer growing season. This is where you see a lot of those early civilizations formed. North and East Africa had close contacts with the Roman and the Islamic world. Introductions of new technology included the single-humped camel. That was introduced to the Sahara from Arabia in the 1st century BCE. As you guys know, it is what made trans-Saharan trade possible. Sources for pre-1000 sub-Saharan Africa include oral history and writings by Arab geographers and explorers, and one of those we'll be talking about throughout this chapter is Ibn Battuta. Most sub-Saharan Africans lived in villages from several hundred to several thousand people. Work was divided by gender, and marriage patterns varied. Some men took more than one wife, some did not. The bonds between men were created by rituals of initiation into adulthood, and a man who accumulated wealth and had many children was considered to be a great and powerful man. So, just a great example, the very diverse regions of Africa's geographic landscapes, as well as you can also see the wind currents that will play a role in the monsoon winds. Human societies adapted to their environment, and because of that, they adopt different means of surviving just to fit into the various ecological zones that are found within the tropics. In Central Africa, the upper altitudes and some sea coasts, they have wild food and fish that was so abundant, human societies thrived without having to develop agriculture or herding economies. Human communities in the arid areas of the tropics relied on herding and supplemented their diets with grain and vegetables obtained through trade with settled agriculturalists. The vast majority of the people of the tropics were farmers, and they cultivated various crops: rice, wheat, sorghum, millet, depending on where they were, the conditions of soil, the climate, and the available water supply. In parts of South and Southeast Asia that had ample water supplies, intensive agriculture transformed the environment and supported a very dense population. And in most parts of sub-Saharan Africa and many parts of Southeast Asia, farmers abandoned their fields every few years and cleared new areas by cutting and burning the natural vegetation. Tropical people used iron for agricultural implements, weapons, and needles. And what's really cool is that sub-Saharan Africa actually learned to smelt iron without, guys, this is awesome, without first using copper and working copper into instruments. That doesn't mean there's not a lot of copper though. Copper is very important. It's abundant. It's used to make wire and decorative objects, but it was never really used for weapons. And that's a big difference. There's no bronze, there's no copper being used. It's all about iron. And Africa is also known for its production of gold. And as you can see, gold bangle. And why I love this picture, it's a great representation of the wealth that was found in Africa, especially in Ghana and Mali. In fact, and this again, why I love this picture, gold was so common in the Kingdom of Mali that women didn't actually use makeup the way we think of the rouge and the eyeshadow, or berries for staining their lips or their cheeks, or charcoal for their eyes. They use gold dust. So that's how much gold was available to them, is the dust from mining gold and from making things. They would use that as makeup, literally meaning, guys, that gold was disposable for them. So take a look at the new Islamic empires in the world. There's going to be quite a number of civilizations growing. Everything you see in yellow is growth of the Islamic world. And you also have within this region areas that were Christian that were taken over, or Islamic areas that were reconquered by Christians. So before, you have the intermingling, people living in peace of different cultures, especially in Spain, guys, right here. And then the Reconquista, with this entire area being taken over by Ferdinand and Isabella. All right, so the first civilization is Jeno, and this was the largest urban site located in the middle Niger Valley. It's one of the oldest cities, if not the oldest city, of sub-Saharan Africa. Inhabitants lived in the civilization as early as 300 BCE. By 900 CE, it had expanded to become one of the largest urban areas of the region. At one point, they had more than 40,000 people. That's pretty impressive. The civilization was located near the Niger River and attracted migrants who were in search of a dependable water supply. With them, they brought domesticated animals, skills, and iron technology into the region. Jeno did not have an organized class structure or a strong central authority like the Egyptians or Romans. Instead, they lived in equality. There was really no political authority and no evidence of warfare. They built many settlements that surrounded a middle city, and these smaller settlements specialized in different trade. One would have ironsmiths, one would have potters, and other leather workers. And eventually, these occupational groups did become segregated. Parents would teach children the family job. Children only married within their group. For the most part, they remain physically separated, even though groups do share services with each other. And even though the Niger provided nutrients for agriculture and clay for pottery, it didn't provide resources such as iron and fuel, which led to a very large system of trade throughout West Africa. Boats were used to travel the Niger and donkeys to travel the land. And the people of the city traded grain, fish, and meats in return for salt, iron, and copper. Eventually, a cultural shift occurred, and larger empires began emerging and connecting cities with one another. Cities absorb one another, and this is how you get large empires forming, which we'll talk about them, the Kingdom of Ghana and the Kingdom of Mali. So we'll start with Ghana. The source for studying Ghana is Al-Bakir in Books of Routes and Realms. The Saharan trading kingdom began as multiple small settlements where various trade routes met. And the Kingdom of Ghana follows a pretty similar path to this. They begin by trading with each other for different ingredients. The trading activities that create the backbone of Ghana's economy were the sale of gold, kola nuts, and ivory to cities along the Mediterranean in exchange for salt. As Ghana grew richer, they began expanding their territorial base. And they began absorbing other cities, and this is how they were able to expand quickly. However, the Soniki were intermediaries. They're the people of Ghana, and they don't control the source where their products of gold, kola nuts, and ivory comes from. They're dependent on the nomadic camel riding Berbers to actually transport their goods north. And Ghana is growing rich off of this trade. The Berbers are not. They actually resent the increasing power of the trading cities that are dominated by Ghana. And with the conquest by Ghana in the 11th century CE of a very important city-state called Otagos, the Berbers began trying to free themselves from Ghana's control. Between 1050 and 1240, Ghana underwent a series of attacks, and their empire began breaking off piece by piece. Ghana would never really recover its former glory, and over the course of 200 years, died a very slow death. In 1240, the kingdom officially collapsed when the heart of their kingdom, Kumbi, was devastated by an attack from one of their subject people, the Susu. Ghana was then taken over by the rising empire of Mali. So I want you to take a look. The Ghana Empire, notice where they are in relation to Mali. We'll be talking about the Songhai Empire later on. The Kingdom of Mali was located in West Africa, centered on the Niger River Basin. Islam had spread to sub-Saharan Africa by a gradual process of peaceful conversion. Conversion was facilitated by commercial contacts. Merchants were carrying it with them. The rulers of Mali converted to Islam around 1000 CE. And some differences between most societies that we've discussed in Mali. Mali's society was matrilineal. Descent and inheritance were determined by women. The founder of the Mali kingdom around 1230 was a man named Sundiata. And the source for his life is in an oral epic called Sundiata, but it was only actually written down in the 20th century. And according to the legend, Sundiata was the son of a king and his wife, and he was exiled by one of his father's other wives. And according to the epic, Mali was formed after a battle of two magicians. In 1240, Sundiata, who was the Muslim leader of the Malinke people, established the kingdom. Mali's economy rested on agriculture and was supplemented by control of regional and trans-Saharan trading routes and, of course, control of the gold mines of the Niger headwaters. An army of Mali had different independent armies with local leaders. So their army is very diverse, and they're able to command the loyalty of the people that they've sort of welcomed, if you will, into their empire by giving them jobs of leadership. And this is how many great, diverse empires are able to last so long. The society in Mali, probably the most famous king of Mali, is Mansa Musa, who would reign from 1307 to 1332. And he went on a pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, traveling through Cairo. Excuse me for just 1 minute, please. Go. Mommy's working. My apologies. Always nice to break it up and, slow down for a minute. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes, talking about Mansa Musa. So on his pilgrimage through Cairo, Mansa Musa brought so much gold with him and distributed it to the people that he actually destroyed the Egyptian economy for 10 years. Servants who were only carrying gold were brought with him, and it's rumored that he gave out 500 walking sticks made of pure gold. In addition to gold coins, miniature gold statues, and this pilgrimage, when he returned to Mali, he was able to establish new mosques and Quran schools based on what he saw during his pilgrimage, based on things he picked up as he traveled, and of course, once he actually reached Mecca. The Kingdom of Mali declined and collapsed in the mid to late 15th century because of rebellions from within and attacks from outside the empire. Intellectual life and trade moved to other African states, including the Hausa states and Kanem Borno. Ibn Battuta objected to the lack of seclusion of Mali women. And as we read his travels, you'll find that the culture shock of many of the places that Battuta travels overwhelmed him, and he didn't handle it with the type of grace and acceptance that hopefully most people would show today. Kings of Mali faced more warfare after 1400, and as a result, imported horses and armor. People of Mali also captured slaves in the forest belt to the south. The two most important trade goods to Mali were slaves and gold, and there was a sense of egalitarianism in the kingdom as men and women were actually allowed to be friends. They were allowed to communicate. In addition, women did not veil themselves in Mali. So these are some major differences. And one reason why Islam was so widely accepted in Africa is the concept of Dar al-Islam, which we'll get into in our next podcast. But people in Mali were able to take Islam and adopt it and blend it into their own culture. We'll get into that a little more next time. We'll stop there for today. If you have any questions, email me. Otherwise, have a great night, guys. Cheers.